Hi everyone. Merry Christmas. At this time of year, Christmas songs and music are all around us, and one of the most recognizable Christmas songs is the classic and iconic Jingle Bells. This simple and fun little song, generally considered the first secular Christmas song ever, has been around for over 150 years, been covered by hundreds of popular singers during this time, and even has numerous parodies, perhaps the most famous being one that dates to at least the 1960s and seen here in the very first episode of The Simpsons.
Oh, jingle bells, Batman smells, Robin laid an egg. The Batmobile broke its wheel, the Joker got a
But where did this song come from? Well, some people claim it was originally written in 1850 in a tavern in Medford, Massachusetts. There's even this plaque at the site, which puts forth several bits of evidence to support that assertion. But this claim is contested by some residents of Savannah, Georgia, who argue it was written there. There's even another plaque found in that city, which, while it doesn't argue this claim directly, makes clear the connection between the city and the famous song. It has also been variously claimed that it was originally a drinking song, or that it was first performed by a Sunday school choir for Thanksgiving, and that it isn't really a Christmas song at all. And in the past few years, there has been renewed interest in and even backlash towards the song, as recent research has shown that it is linked to the minstrel shows of the mid-19th century. These claims have led to at least one school removing it from its curriculum, and to eloquent and well-researched comments from YouTube like this. So, what is going on with this song? Where did it come from? Who wrote it? And why? Let's find out. First of all, let's talk a bit about the song's composer, James Lord Pierpont. Pierpont was born in 1822 in Boston, Massachusetts, to a pretty well-to-do New England family. His father was the famous poet, abolitionist, and minister John Pierpont, who served as a pastor in Boston and Medford, Massachusetts. His brother was also a reverend in Savannah, Georgia, and his nephew, his sister's son, was J.P. Morgan, who became the incredibly wealthy financier and investment banker, whose eponymous company is still around today. James Lord Pierpont, however, did not achieve the success or reputation that these other members of his family did. Instead, he was kind of a wild guy who drifted a bit aimlessly, trying his hand, usually unsuccessfully, at a variety of different trades and lines of work, from making dresses to sailing on a whaling ship to working at a dairy. He obviously had some musical training and could play the piano and organ, and for a while had a job playing the organ in his brother's church in Savannah. He even made his way out to San Francisco in 1849, where he ran a shop and tried to cash in on the gold rush, until a fire in 1851 burned down his business. After this, he made his way home to Massachusetts, completely broke. Shortly after, in March 1852, he published his first song, The Returned Californian. This is a somewhat bitter song that was probably a bit autobiographical, about an unsuccessful miner leaving California and fleeing his creditors. This song was arranged by John P. Ordway, a musician, theater owner, and manager of Ordway's Aeolians, a blackface minstrel troupe. We'll talk more about this in a bit. The sheet music states that the song was written expressly for Ordway's Aeolians, and was first performed by S.C. Howard, a member of this troupe. And it would have been performed at Ordway Hall, a theater John Ordway owned in Boston, where his troupe performed. The Returned Californian was the start of Pierpont's composing career, and throughout the 1850s into the early 1860s, he continued to write songs, some of which were performed by Ordway's troupe, others of which, like Poor Elsie and Ring the Bell Fanny, were written specifically for other minstrel troupes. In 1857, Pierpont moved south to Georgia and ended up marrying the daughter of Savannah's mayor. And despite his father's vehement abolitionist beliefs, he ended up supporting the pro-slavery secessionist cause of the South. At the outbreak of the Civil War, he even joined the Confederate Army and wrote a few more songs, such as We Conquer or Die and Strike for the South, pro-Confederate Southern patriotic songs. After the war, he stayed in the South, mostly teaching music, but he seems to have pretty much given up on his songwriting. He might have written a march for the town of Quitman, Georgia, after he moved there in 1869, but I can't find any sheet music for this. He ended up moving to Florida towards the end of his life and died there on August 5th, 1893, aged 71. So, that's James Lord Pierpont. But what about his most famous composition, Jingle Bells? Where does that fit in? Well, let's start by looking at the original published sheet music. And this is the version held by the Library of Congress that anyone could go access online. The first thing we notice is that it wasn't actually called Jingle Bells at first. The original title of this song is The One-Horse Open Sleigh. We can also see that it was published in 1857, and it was deposited for copyright on September 16, 1857. We can also see that it was dedicated to John P. Ordway, the same man for whom he wrote his first song. So the claim from the first plaque we saw can't be exactly right. We know the song wasn't written in 1850 in Medford because in 1850, Pierpont was out in San Francisco. Also, he was always in need of money, so it doesn't make sense that if he did write it in 1850, that he would wait 7 years to publish it. However, it is still possible that he wrote it in Medford just in 1857. But what about Savannah? Could he have written it there? He did end up moving to Savannah in 1857 at around the same time the song was published, so that's also possible. But according to research by Dr. Keena Hamill of Boston University, she thinks it's most likely that the song we know today as Jingle Bells was written by Pierpont in a rooming house not far from the old State House in downtown Boston, where he lived at least in the early summer of 1857 before moving south. Dr. Keena Hamill is actually somewhat of an authority on the origin of Jingle Bells and the history of James Lord Pierpont. Back in 2016, Hamill was working as a volunteer with the Medford Historical Society and Museum, which often fielded calls from reporters about the origin of Jingle Bells, when she realized that the traditional narrative that the song was written in Medford was challenged by residents of Savannah. So she started digging. This led her to discover more about the history of Pierpont, the origin and background of Jingle Bells, and uncover the uncomfortable fact that the very first performance of this Christmas classic was actually in a blackface minstrel show. Now, Hamill's research is very interesting, but has unfortunately been misinterpreted by some people and even covered by Fox News in a somewhat sensationalized manner.
The newest Christmas controversy has social justice warriors claiming this classic holiday carol is racist.
And stealing Christmas from our families? What in the world is going on?
Now, I don't agree with everything Hamill says either, but let's take a slightly more measured and academic look at the arguments she puts forth and see what we can figure out. First off, let's take a look at minstrel shows. These were shows of almost all white performers dressed in blackface and performing comic skits and variety acts, dancing and singing songs in exaggerated, stereotypical black dialect. These shows first emerged in the 1830s and grew to become the most popular form of theater in the US in the 1840s and 50s, surpassing opera companies, circuses, and traveling European performers like Jenny Lind. Minstrel shows stereotyped African Americans as dim-witted, lazy, buffoonish, cowardly, superstitious, and happy-go-lucky. There were also multiple racist tropes, such as the happy slave, the provocative wench, and the northern black dandy, who we'll talk more about in a bit. And these shows and the songs they included often had a pro-slavery tilt to them. White people would go to these shows and laugh at these grotesque caricatures of black people and their place in society, and it all reinforced the racist ideas and stereotypes of the times and served to essentially dehumanize African Americans. So this is the musical and theatrical environment in which and for which Pierpont was writing his songs. Most of his songs are written specifically to be performed by various blackface troupes in these minstrel shows. And while the majority of his songs are not written in the stereotypical black dialect many other minstrel songs employed, there are two of his that are. The Colored Coquette and Kitty Crow, both from 1853, utilize this dialect in the lyrics and even include the N-word. Now, of course, as we all know, Jingle Bells does not utilize this type of language. Or does it? In her academic article, The Story I Must Tell, Jingle Bells in the Minstrel Repertoire, Keena Hamill argues that although Jingle Bells is not written exclusively in a dialect, words such as through, thought, and upsot suggest a racialized performance that attempted to sound Southern to a Northern audience. Here are the lyrics she's talking about found in the original version of the sheet music. Now, it is true that the word upsot, in place of upset, meaning to be knocked or turned over, is used in other writings utilizing black dialect. But it can also be argued that the word upsot was simply used here to complete the rhyme with the word lot. I've even seen the argument that it's a play on the word sot, which means a drunkard. As for the other words, I really think they're just shortened to fit better, which many other songs also do, like here in this 1929 song, Tiptoe Through the Tulips with Me. And none of the rest of the words are written in the stereotypical dialect at all. Otherwise, the word the would be written as duh, like here, and in almost every other example of a song written in black dialect. So I totally disagree that the lyrics we see here were written to suggest a racialized performance in any way. To me, the lyrics don't indicate this at all. But the song was definitely written for a minstrel show. That's another claim that Hamill makes in her paper, but this one is much better supported. She points out the fact that the original song was dedicated to John P. Ordway, which, like many other songs Pierpont wrote, indicates a connection between the song and a premiere performance of the song. But more important than this is the fact that she found the playbill that shows what is most likely the first performance of Jingle Bells. This shows that on Tuesday, September 15, 1857, the day before Jingle Bells is copyrighted, Johnny Pell of Ordway's Aeolians performs the song, labeled in the program as One Horse Open Sleigh. Hamill goes on to say that that's the earliest I found it being performed. I don't see it in any other sources. I have never been able to find it in any other hall, any other place. And that because Ordway supported James's songwriting career, it's very natural that that might have been the very first performance of this song. That all makes sense to me, and unless there's evidence that shows it being performed elsewhere before this, I think this has to be considered the first performance of the song. So, what does this all mean? The song was first performed in a minstrel show, but wasn't written like a minstrel song? Why? Is this a minstrel song, or is it not? And how does that affect how we see it today? Well, I don't have a definite answer, and it doesn't seem to be an issue that Hamill addresses in her article on this song, but I have a few ideas. First of all, this is not terribly uncommon. Before I started looking into this, I assumed all minstrel songs were written in black dialect, as they were intended to be sung by a white person pretending to be black. And the most popular songs from this time, many of which we still recognize today, support this. From Stephen Foster's Camptown Races and Oh Susanna, to perhaps the most egregious minstrel song, Dixie, these are all minstrel songs with lyrics written in black dialect. However, there are several songs, including most of the other songs Pierpont wrote, that are not written in dialect, but were still first sung in a minstrel show by a white person in blackface. Why would a song not be written in black dialect if it was being written for a minstrel show? It's possible that there were minstrel songs, and then there were songs for minstrel shows. Essentially, the minstrel songs are the extremely racist songs, like Pierpont's The Colored Coquette and Kitty Crow, with lyrics written in black dialect that we can see in the printed sheet music, and dealing with a stereotypical issue affecting African Americans. And it's possible there's a difference between these and songs like Jingle Bells and many of Pierpont's other songs, which were not written in black dialect or deal with black topics, but were debuted in minstrel shows anyways. And they would be debuted in those shows probably because minstrel shows were the most popular form of entertainment at the time. They were more widespread and probably easier to get a song into than any other type of musical show those days, like opera companies or touring European entertainers. Alternatively, it's possible that these songs not written in black dialect were still actually minstrel songs, like the others, but that the lack of dialect in the lyrics is because it was sung by the dandy character. The northern black dandy was the proud, flashy dresser, usually from the city, who is portrayed as trying to live above his station by mimicking white upper-class speech and dress, usually unsuccessfully. There was even usually a portion of minstrel shows that specifically dealt with this character. And the musical material in the northern dandy half of the show became more refined, sophisticated, and sentimental in the late 1840s and early 50s. Now, I don't know if that means that the dandy character sang without the dialect or not, but it's possible that, at least when writing a song intended to be sung by this character, regular English was used instead of the stereotypical black dialect. I'm not sure if either of these is entirely right, but those are just a couple of ideas I have. I tend to lean more towards the former theory, and unless there's some evidence that indicates otherwise, I'll probably consider Jingle Bells and some of these other songs to be songs written for minstrel shows, but not necessarily minstrel songs entirely. Whatever the reason, this is the historical background of Jingle Bells. It was written for and first performed in a racist minstrel show, but certainly isn't written in black dialect, and I, for one, don't consider this a racist song in and of itself. But what about that strange YouTube comment we saw earlier that talked about bells on black people's necks? This comment appears to be based on an idea that seems to have originated on TikTok that suggests that Jingle Bells references the use of collars with bells worn by slaves to send an alert that they were running away, and that the word sleigh, meaning a sled, actually refers to slaying or killing slaves. While there are some historical examples of collars with bells like these, they have absolutely no relation to the song Jingle Bells. This claim is completely unfounded and not at all historically accurate. Maybe TikTok's not the best source of information. But the question does still remain. Given this song was written for and first performed in a minstrel show, how should we deal with it today? Well, I'm sure it would depend on personal preference, but as for me, I have no issues with this song's place in society today or people singing this song at Christmas time. And it's worth mentioning here that Keena Hamill thinks this as well. In that same article about the school who banned the song, she is quoted as saying, "My article tried to tell the story of the first performance of the song. I do not connect this to the popular Christmas tradition of singing the song now, and that I in no way recommended that it stopped being sung by children. Now, there's still the question of, is this really a Christmas song? It's definitely become a Christmas song today, but if we don't consider it a minstrel song, what kind of song was this originally? It wasn't first performed at Thanksgiving, and the lyrics, which we'll get into in a bit, don't talk about Thanksgiving or Christmas. And there's not much evidence that it was ever a drinking song. So what kind of song was this? The answer can actually be found in the first verse of the song, when it says, "What fun it is to ride and sing a sleighing song tonight." See, during the 1840s and 50s, there are several songs published that are known at the time as sleighing songs. That is, songs about sleigh rides. Essentially, sleighing evolved from a simple means of transportation in the winter to a form of entertainment in the 1840s and 50s. The sleighing experience, which Hamill equates to a synonym for youth, not unlike fast cars in the 20th century, incorporated several elements including speed, flirting, and music. And as this sleigh riding practice became more popular, we can see this reflected in the various artistic mediums of the day. There's art, literary narratives, and songs, which all put a focus on the sleighing fad of the time. Here's a Currier and Ives print from 1853 that shows a typical sleighing scene. And here's an 1843 poem by George W. Patton, a lieutenant in the U.S. Army who became known as the Poet Laureate of the Army. This poem, titled "The Merry Sleigh," includes some of those elements commonly found in sleighing narratives from this time, such as singing, girls, and fast and reckless driving, which in some other stories often led to a crash or upset. And this poem became the basis for several sleighing songs published over the next decade. The lyrics of all these songs are taken directly from Patton's poem. And there were lots of other sleighing songs published during this time too. Some of these were instrumental without any lyrics, like these, while others had lyrics written by other people, like these. Now, some of these songs were also parodied and used in minstrel shows. Patton's original poem had the lyrics and title changed several times and became "The Merry Sleigh Bells" in 1852 and "The Darkies' Sleighing Party" in 1853. And one of the other songs, Buckley's Sleighing Song, was written for the Buckley's Serenaders minstrel troupe. And Keena Hamill uses these songs, along with parodies of those earlier prints created decades later, like this one, to argue that many sleighing songs, including Jingle Bells, were written to satirize black participation in northern winter activities and originated as a product of the minstrel stage. However, it seems to me more likely that sleighing stories and songs were simply a popular part of American popular culture at the time, and the minstrel versions of these songs came about due to the fact that minstrel shows often simply parodied whatever was popular at the time. As one analysis puts it, the minstrel show in this period was taking much of the mid-century musical world in America and, so to speak, turning it on its ear. The last thing to mention about these sleighing songs is that while most of them were written in the 1840s and 50s, there were also a few written in later years, such as another song titled Jingle Bells from 1880 and the instrumental Merry Sleigh Ride from 1909. Now, let's move on from the song's background and origins and talk a bit about the song itself and how it has evolved over time into the song we know today. First, let's take a look at the lyrics. There were originally 4 verses and then the chorus. The original first verse is still the first verse nowadays and is generally the most commonly heard verse. There are just a few minor differences between the original words and the modern version. The original "O'er the hills" was changed to "O'er the fields," and the original "Oh, what sport to ride and sing" became "What fun it is to ride and sing." There are a few other minor differences like these in the 4th verse, but the most noticeable change is found in the chorus, where the original "Oh, what joy it is to ride" is now known as "Oh, what fun it is to ride." Another big change is that we seem to have completely dropped one verse entirely. While we mostly hear the first verse today, the original verse 2 and 4 are still heard not infrequently. But we have completely dropped the original 3rd verse, which is actually my favorite. It tells the story of the narrator slipping in the snow and falling down, and then a man who's riding by in a sleigh laughs at him and then just takes off. It's pretty funny. So besides that 3rd verse, the lyrics are pretty similar to what we hear these days, and they generally follow the pattern set out in all of those earlier sleighing songs. The song's narrative includes singing, girls, fast driving, and a crash. Now, because of these similarities, Keena Hamill argues in her paper that the song's lyrics display no real originality and share a resemblance to other products of the sleigh genre. And actually, I think I kind of agree with her. The lines "drifted bank," "go it while you're young," and even the original title "One Horse Open Sleigh" are all lifted straight from other songs. And even the famous phrase "jingle all the way" is pretty similar to that poem we saw earlier, The Merry Sleigh, where the first line reads, "Jingle, jingle, clear the way." Even my favorite Jingle Bells verse, that third one about a rude sleigh driver, is very similar to The Merry Sleigh's second verse, which reads, "Roguish archers I'll be bound, little heeding who they wound. See them with capricious pranks, plowing now the drifted banks. Jingle, jingle, mid their glee, who among them cares for me?" But again, so many sleighing songs were written during this time, and all of them told the same basic story that I don't think this is really a big deal. And at least Pierpont wrote his own lyrics instead of just using that same poem as a basis for his song, like so many other people did. And I think that Pierpont also added a bit more humor and levity to his version compared to some of the others. And of course, one thing that Pierpont added that was wholly unique was his iconic music. Who among us doesn't know that classic melody from the chorus? That doesn't sound like the song we know today. Actually, one of the most interesting things about this song is the mystery of the change in music. So let's take a look at it and see if we can figure out what happened. And when we look at the music, I'm going to put it all in the same key, A flat, which was the original key, even though we usually see it written in the key of G these days. The music of the verse is actually very similar to what we still sing today. There are only two short sections where the music of the original is different than the modern version. The first is the end of the second phrase. Here's the modern version. And here's the original version. And then there's a difference in the middle of the fourth phrase. Here's the modern version. And here's the original. But besides these two small parts, the melody of the verse is the same now as when the song was first written. The real change is found in the chorus. We probably all know the modern version of the chorus really well, so I won't go over it. But here's the original music of the chorus. We can see that it's actually written for 4-part harmony with a fancy piano accompaniment. And here's what that all sounds like. And for this clip, I've got the vocal part being represented by a MIDI flute, so that the vocal and piano parts are a bit more distinct. And here's just the melody, played on piano, which we find in the soprano part. So, I don't know about you, but I really like this. I think it's a lot more interesting and fun than the modern version, even if we're just looking at the melody. And when you add the harmony, it makes it sound even better. And if you want to hear a good arrangement of this original version performed by a real choir, I've got a link in the description to my favorite one. So then the question becomes, when did the music change and why? And the answer is, no one really knows. But we can trace the changes a bit. So the song was originally published in 1857. Here's the original cover page. Then it was recopyrighted and republished in 1859 with this new cover page, featuring new artwork and a new title, Jingle Bells or the One-Horse Open Sleigh. No one knows why it was republished, but copyright protections were not terribly robust at the time, so it's possible he was just trying to keep his name connected to the song. It's also possible that the song was just becoming known popularly as Jingle Bells, and he wanted to capitalize on that and ensure people bought his officially published version of the song. Interestingly, even though the cover page has the new title of Jingle Bells on it, the first page of sheet music still has the title as One-Horse Open Sleigh. And then finally, there seems to be one more publication of the original version, perhaps published around the time the song was recopyrighted yet again in 1885. In this version, as we see here, the title has been even more definitively changed to the common version, although it still includes the original title too. Interestingly, there's a mistake on the cover of this version where it states Pierpont's name as J.S. Pierpont. I don't know the reason for this, but it's a mistake that we also see on one of his earlier songs, The Little White Cottage. Anyways, the music for these three versions of Jingle Bells is all the same and stands in contrast to other published versions of this song, which we also start to see in the 1880s. These other versions can be found in several anthologies or collections of sheet music. In 1887, we find Jingle Bells included in this songbook of popular college songs, and in 1888, this songbook, College Songs for Banjo, which says it contains popular songs of the day. In these collections, the song is only named Jingle Bells, although there's an odd comma between jingle and bells for some reason. And the music of the chorus is the version we know today. No one really knows who changed it or why, but it obviously occurred sometime between when the song was first published in 1857 and when these books came out in the 1880s. Keena Hamill states that some Catholic boys' choirs performing all over Boston in the 1860s were singing One Horse Open Sleigh, and that during this time, it's certainly being performed pretty regularly. But it seems to me that if a choir was singing it, it would probably retain its four-part harmony, and as a result, most likely its original music. So perhaps the change came about when the song was included in these anthology books in the 1880s. Now, these books could have kept the song's original melody, even if it got rid of the four-part vocal harmony, but maybe they changed the melody at the same time just to make it a bit simpler? Again, no one really knows for sure. Whatever the reason, after the 1880s, the music of the original version is hardly ever heard again and seems to have been completely supplanted by the later version. We can see this in further copies of the sheet music, like these, found in 1909's Songs That Never Grow Old, and 1915's The Golden Book of Favorite Songs, and in pretty much every future version of the sheet music as well. We can also hear this in the various recordings of the song that begin to be made in the early 20th century. The very first recording of Jingle Bells was supposedly made by banjoist Will Lyle in 1889, but there's no surviving copy of this. The oldest recording that exists today was done by the Edison Male Quartet in 1898, and this version has the changed modern melody in the chorus.
Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in one horse open sleigh. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in one horse open sleigh.
After this, the song continues to be recorded by more and more people, from Benny Goodman in 1935 to Bing Crosby and the Andrews Sisters in 1943. And many of these versions charted and sold millions of copies. The song can also be heard incorporated into the soundtrack of the famous 1947 classic Christmas film Miracle on 34th Street, as well as many other films and on television. And it continued to grow in popularity, being covered by hundreds of other artists, and was even the first song to broadcast from space, when Gemini 6 astronauts played it on the harmonica while communicating with Mission Control in 1965. Now, it's hard to say why this song has become so popular over the years. Perhaps it's because it's a simple, fun little song with an easy-to-remember chorus that isn't quite as solemn as many religious hymns and carols. Perhaps it's due to the more simple music it was given in the 1880s. It's possible, as much as I prefer the original melody and harmony, that that version would not have lasted as long and stuck around as well as this simpler version has. While we can't quite say for sure what the reason is behind the song's longevity, it has certainly found its way into our collective cultural consciousness, and despite where it came from and how it was first performed, it is undeniable now that when you think of Christmas songs, this is one of the first ones that comes to mind. Thanks for watching, and Merry Christmas.